2 News begins right now with breaking
Neon
news.
Welcome to the Shrines of the Black Madonna, where we believe in you being your best self. Come with an open mind and an open heart. We invite you to partake in our worship experience. Follow us on all of our social media platforms. Giving is an opportunity for us to build community, ministry, health, and best self. Tap into your greatness that God has already placed inside of you and share it with the world. We would love to see you more often. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
I believe that human society stands under the judgment of one God, revealed to all and known by many names.
His creative power is visible in the mysteries of the universe.
In the revolutionary Holy Spirit, which will not long permit men and women to endure injustice, nor to wear the shackles of bondage in the rage of the powers when they struggle to be free.
And in the violence and conflict, which even now threaten to level the hills and the mountains.
I believe
that Jesus, the Black Messiah,
was a revolutionary leader
sent by God to rebuild the Black nation Israel
and to liberate African people from powerlessness,
from the oppression,
brutality, and exploitation of the white Gentile world.
I believe
that the revolutionary spirit of God embodied in the Black Messiah
is born anew in each generation,
and that Black Christian nationalists constitute the living remnant of God's chosen people
in this day, and are charged by God with responsibility for the liberation of African people.
I believe
that
both my survival
and my salvation
depend upon my willingness
to reject individualism.
And so I commit my life
to the liberation struggle of African people
and accept the values,
ethics,
morals,
and programs of the Black nation, defined by that struggle
and taught by the Pan-African Orthodox Christian Church.
Get connected and stay connected online with the Shrine of the Black Madonna Virtual Village. Worship, join, learn, give, connect with us, all in one place in just 3 easy steps. 1. Go to our landing page via our Linktree URL or QR code. 2. Browse our selections and decide what you want to do and where you want to go. 3. Click on your choice and we'll take you right there. Yes, in just 3 easy steps, you can worship, join, learn, give, all in one place. So get connected and stay connected with us online at the Shrine of the Black Madonna Virtual Village.
A few years ago, I was in Memphis at a 3-day workshop. They called it a master class with Reverend Dr. Jeremiah Wright. Accompanying him were Jesse Jackson and Alan Bosak, the South African Black theologian that was such a great admirer of our founder. Jesse Jackson, who was just then beginning to show signs of his battle with Parkinson's disease, told us about how a group of Martin Luther King's disciples got together just before Christmas. These are people who knew and worked with Dr. King. They reminisced, laughed, and cried. And while together their conversation touched upon the subject of the upcoming Martin Luther King national holiday. They expressed appreciation for the national holiday in his name, for the almost 1,000 cities that had streets named in his honor, for the over 100 schools that bear his name, and for the 30-foot statue in Washington, D.C. that graces the National Mall. They felt it was richly deserved, but they also expressed another feeling. They were angered by the fact that the present-day characterizations of Martin Luther King, of what he believed, of what he stood for, and what he was trying to do, were almost always wrong. They felt the dramatizations, the speeches, the reenactments to all be shallow and cartoonish, almost disrespectful. They felt everything done failed to capture the substance and character and devotion of a man who gave everything he had to God and his people. So they felt they not only assassinated his body, they assassinated his legacy. Jesse Jackson declared Martin was a revolutionary, a courageous crusader for justice. He said his commitment was so complete that it was intimidating to be in his presence, and his determination so uncompromised that it sometimes made you more than a little afraid about what he would say or do next, because we knew we were expected to follow. The group complained that scholars have become the official gatekeepers of Martin Luther King's legacy, not the people who knew him and struggled with him. And the job of these scholars is to fashion a Martin Luther King story that fits neatly within the American story without contradicting it. These gatekeepers have constructed an American story of upward progress from the evils of slavery to the Civil War's moral triumph over slavery, to the Civil Rights struggle moral triumph over racism, to Barack Obama's election as President of the United States, and as the realization of Dr. King's dream. Today, these gatekeepers speak as the highest authorities on Martin Luther King. And it has changed and watered down his true legacy. In canonizing Dr. King, they have defanged him. They've made him a toothless tiger. They replaced his complicated politics and visionary philosophies with catchphrases that can be applied to any ideology. Today, white nationalists and racists, even dictators and scoundrels, quote Dr. King like he was one of them. In traditional African society, ancestor veneration is a central part of religious life. In the Pan-African Orthodox Christian Church, we continue this tradition of honoring and seeking guidance from our ancestors. And we not only have familial ancestors who are blood descendants, we also have group ancestors, people whose example characterize who we are, what we stand for, and what we believe. They reinforce our collective values and serve as shining examples of all we hold dear. It is for this reason that on this Sunday each year, we pay tribute to the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. to commemorate his contributions and sacrifices for black people. And part of honoring and paying tribute to him is knowing the truth about who he really was, what he really stood for, and what he did. To know his real story is how we discern what that story is telling us today. So in the Pan-African Orthodox Christian Church, we do not honor the fabricated fairy tale Martin Luther King of the white imagination. We honor our glorious ancestor brother by making the effort to discover the authentic Martin Luther King Jr. Today, I want to remind us of who he was and what he did and why he is a worthy ancestor and example for us and for generations to come. First, Martin Luther King broke the power of fear that was the key to maintaining a Jim Crow social order. After 250 years of slavery, the Civil War brought an end to chattel slavery. And right away, a new system was created that ended slavery technically, but ensured the continued oppression and exploitation of black people. We went from being slaves owned by a master to being public slaves owned by a society. We were segregated, excluded, controlled, and exploited by a whole society. Every white person was a master. Black people were obligated to show deference to every one of them, including small children. Everything possible was done to perpetuate our powerlessness and to make the declaration of black inferiority appear to be true. Squalid conditions, separate and unequal accommodation, lynching, terrorism, unequal treatment, intentional poverty, inadequate education, discrimination, disenfranchisement of the vote, and mass incarceration were all employed to keep black people in a state of total domination. As a result, 50 years after slavery was abolished, there were 5 times more black people in debt slavery as sharecroppers than there were in chattel slavery before the Civil War. A de facto system of slavery existed in America from 1865 all the way up to 1965. This whole Jim Crow system was maintained by one thing and one thing only: fear. Fear made people accept indignity and humiliation. Fear made grown black men look at the ground and speak in a whisper in the presence of white people. Fear made black people unwilling to stand with relatives running from lynch mobs. Fear kept black people from speaking out, standing up, fighting back, and seeking justice. Fear was the thread that stitched together the social order of the Old South. Crippling, paralyzing, incapacitating fear. Our beloved founder used to tell the story of a son that was being chased by the Klan who ran to his home through the woods. He was met on the front porch by his father holding a shotgun. The son naturally went to get his gun too. When the father then pointed the gun at his only son and said, "You can't stay here. You gotta go. You gotta get away from here." That is the power of fear. Martin Luther King is significant because he was instrumental in breaking the grip of fear on black people. There are many examples of his personal courage in the face of danger. In the Montgomery jail, in his bombed out house, in the Reedsville Penitentiary, in the Birmingham jail, on Selma's Edmund Pettus Bridge. But more importantly than his own courage, he inspired others to break the spell of fear over their own lives. Beginning with the Montgomery bus boycott, Martin Luther King led black people to confront white people face to face, eyeball to eyeball, and they won. And the world was never the same. Black people discovered that if they were unified and if they were not afraid to die, then white people held no power over them. In the 1967 book, The Black Messiah, our beloved founder describes this when he says, "Something has happened to black people in these United States. We are not as we were a few years ago. Something has happened to us, not to America, but to us. The way we think, the way we fight, the way we work together. This is the most important thing that has ever happened in America." What is this something? It is that the fear is gone. Just a while ago, we were so very different. Down south, we were afraid. Up north, we were afraid. The fear was a very elementary fear. Essentially, it was the fear of dying. When the white man in the South said, "Get off the sidewalk," why did we get off? Because we were afraid of dying. We are not afraid anymore. So the white man has stopped saying it, and now he's afraid. We didn't understand this before because we functioned as individuals. We were afraid to fight because we felt that if we fought, we would fight alone and we would die alone. It's hard to stand up and be a man when you're all by yourself. The difference now is that we are coming together. We are no longer just individuals. We are becoming a nation. So the fear is gone. This is exactly what Martin Luther King did. Black people had rallies in churches. Martin Luther King spoke. Then they sang and sang and sang until the Holy Spirit melted away the icy grip of fear. And then they went into the streets to risk their lives for freedom. Martin Luther King helped break the grip of fear on black people, and things have never been the same. Secondly, Martin Luther King orchestrated confrontations that exposed the ugly, brutal, cruel, and evil nature of American racial discrimination and oppression to the whole world. Victory in World War II elevated America to superpower status in the world. America was no longer a backwater country where no one cared about its bad behavior. At stake now was world supremacy. And the two competing superpowers vying for that supremacy was America and the Soviet Union, with the rest of the world in the middle choosing sides. At the same time, the non-white peoples of the world had a global conference in Bandung, Indonesia in 1955. They declared solidarity with each other and pledged to stand in opposition to the colonialism and racism that had oppressed them in the past. They began to throw off the shackles of bondage in a cascade of revolutions around the world, from Africa to Asia to Latin America. These newly liberated non-white countries also waited to choose sides between the two competing superpowers. And to tell you the truth, they were leaning toward communism. The U.S. situation is explained by the Committee on Civil Rights, commissioned by President Harry Truman. They said, our position in the post-war world is so vital to the future that our smallest actions have far-reaching effects. We cannot escape the fact that our civil rights records has been an issue in world politics. The world's press and radio are full of it. Those with competing philosophies have stressed and are shamelessly distorting our shortcomings. They've tried to prove our democracy an empty fraud and our nation a consistent oppressor of underprivileged people. This may seem ludicrous to Americans, but it is sufficiently important to worry our friends. The United States is not so strong. The final triumph of the democratic ideal is not so inevitable that we can ignore what the world thinks of our record. In the middle of a world where people are choosing sides, the United States couldn't afford to look bad. And Martin Luther King and the civil rights leaders devised a strategy that was designed to make the United States look bad on the world stage. They knew the United States couldn't risk losing potential allies to the communist camp. They also knew that the stupid, average, mean, hateful white person wouldn't be able to resist whooping Negroes' heads no matter who was looking. The cameras were rolling. The civil rights strategists were betting that the global interests of the United States empire would trump the racist traditions of the Jim Crow South. Martin Luther King was more successful at employing this strategy than anyone else. By becoming an international celebrity, he was able to garner attention to his cause. He was Time magazine's Man of the Year in 1963. He won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964. He was a consultant and antagonist to Presidents Kennedy and Johnson. During this time, he was repeatedly voted the most admired man in America. His public profile ensured that anything he did would attract significant media attention. And to maintain that profile, he crisscrossed the country, speaking as much as 4 times a day. This public shaming strategy coincided with the fact that TVs had just become affordable enough for most families in America to be able to have one. Every day on the evening news, the scenes of unspeakable violence against peaceful black protesters who were only asking for the rights that had been secured for them by the Civil War 100 years before. This had profound effects on many people in the country. When they saw the kind of unrestrained violence and wanton brutality that was usually conducted in secret and under the cover of darkness, when they saw it out in the open for the whole world to see, the depraved police officers were playing right into the hands of the civil rights leaders. TV was filled with blood-soaked heads, police dogs attacking women, fire hoses washing away children. It was like George Floyd dying on TV every day. This constant spectacle of racial violence broadcasted into America's living rooms and around the world every day had many white Americans asking, is this the kind of country we want? And it led the non-white nations to ask, is this something we want to be a part of? This strategy forced the federal government to act to stop overt acts of violence and discrimination against black people. Thirdly, Martin Luther King effectively strategized to put pressure on the government to pass landmark civil rights legislation to ensure full citizenship for black people. Each demonstration was calculated to obtain specific concessions. The 1963 March on Washington was not a party. It was a demonstration designed to force the president and the Congress to pass specific legislation. Politicians were terrified when hundreds of thousands of black people descended on Washington, D.C., and the demonstration forced them to pass federal civil rights legislation and make it the law of the land. The pressure applied became so intense that the powers that be had no alternative but to come to the table and seek a negotiated settlement. Politicians and businessmen all across the South asked Martin Luther King to simply come tell them what black people wanted. His protests across the South in Montgomery, Birmingham, Albany, St. Augustine, Selma, Greenwood, and elsewhere led to the passing of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, federal legislation barring discrimination in public places. The 1965 Voting Rights Act, safeguarding black people's right to vote across the country. The Fair Housing Act, making housing discrimination illegal. And affirmative action that offered preferential treatment to historically disadvantaged groups. To tell you the truth, the freedoms and rights and opportunities that we have enjoyed our whole lives came from the direct actions of Martin Luther King and the civil rights struggle. The last stage of Dr. King's ministry went beyond civil rights for black people. When he realized that the rotten corruption ran all the way to the top, and that the institutions and values undergirding the American way of life were evil and corrupt, he said, I believe I have integrated my people into a burning house. So he expanded his efforts by seeking to bring about a fundamental revolution of American values. He called for the renunciation of the evils of militarism, capitalism, and racism, And his voice had become so influential and respected that a lot of people from all backgrounds and all over the world were willing to listen. Martin Luther King had been an asset in getting the Jim Crow South to accept the fact that things were going to have to change after World War II. That was in America's interest. But when he began to call into question the very foundations of the American way of life, denouncing racism, war, capitalism, and the economic inequality it created, he was deemed an enemy of the state. Many of his supporters and admirers turned on him. He was working on his Poor People's Campaign that was going to bring thousands of people back to Washington to set up camp on the mall and stay until the government ended the war in Vietnam and redistributed the wealth of America by creating full employment and by providing a universal basic income to all Americans. On April of 1967, Dr. King announced his new prophetic emphasis to the world when he stood up in New York's Riverside Church before thousands of people and preached on the subject, Why I Oppose the War in Vietnam. In that sermon, he called the United States the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. He spoke on the disproportionate number of black people dying on the front lines. He spoke about the injustice of the double portion for black people, oppression and poverty at home, and death in Vietnam. He called for a basic redistribution of the wealth. He denounced war, poverty, and racism, and called on all Americans to do the same. Before, he was deemed heroic. Now, he was dangerous. He had become what J. Edgar Hoover had been warning of all along, a threat to the American way of life. Exactly 1 year later, April 4th, 1968, Martin Luther King was shot dead on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis. Martin Luther King is the patron saint of black people's struggle for full citizenship in America. The confrontations he engineered changed us by taking away our fear. Against withering opposition, he secured the rights that lay the foundation for the life we enjoy today. He is a shining example of a person who developed his potential, nurtured his talent, and prepared himself so that when God called him to play his ordained role in history, he was ready and willing to do his part. He was a man of sincere spiritual conviction, revolutionary moral courage, a strategic genius, a shrewd political tactician, and a visionary, inspirational leader. His heart and mind were open to discern God's will. His commitment was total, and he had the moral courage to stand for what was right, despite the consequences. Martin Luther King is a shining example of a person who gave all he had in his time. He gives us a model of what it means to keep our divine obligation in our time. Most of the celebrations of Martin Luther King commemorate the past events as if the work is done and we're looking back on how we got over. But today, the rights and laws procured during the Civil Rights Movement are being systematically reversed. Today, the MAGA movement is in a step-by-step process of laying the legal foundation for making black people second-class citizens again. You could call it a reverse civil rights struggle. Funded by white nationalist millionaires, they are carrying out a systematic effort to roll back the rights and opportunities of black people. They have already undermined our voting rights, eliminated affirmative action, stopped police reform, eviscerated reproductive rights, outlawed the truthful teaching of history, gutted public education, and prevented student debt forgiveness. And now they are seeking to outlaw all diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts from American institutions to block black advancement. The rights that Martin Luther King helped secure for black people are being eliminated right before our eyes. The MAGA movement has launched an all-out effort to attack democracy by undermining democratic institutions. What are democratic institutions? The press, the schools and universities, the courts, and the politicians. This is a strategy taken right out of 1930 Nazi Germany called Leistenschalte, which means coordinated. It calls for the coordinated use of fear to make teachers, professors, judges, journalists, and yes, even preachers afraid to speak the truth. The goal is to erase history. To do that, you have to be able to make the people who teach history too afraid to tell the truth. This is going on all around us right now as I speak. At a time when black women are rising, they have become for many a sign of unwelcome change. Their presence and positions of power represent a threat to mediocre, entitled white males who feel that they have a divine right to occupy these positions. A prime example is the plight of Claudine Gay, the first black president of Harvard University, who was pushed out after only 6 months because white males found her to be an inappropriate symbol of America's preeminent university. The very presence of a black person in this position of status and prestige drove them into a neurological breakdown. Efforts to get rid of her started as soon as she was announced as president. From the beginning, they made racist comments about black people being inherently dumb and lazy, incompetent, and unqualified. And these are the same people that would make an ignoramus like Donald Trump president again. And they're not going to stop with Harvard. This is just the beginning of conservative activists using their money and influence to remove black people who do not do their bidding from democratic institutions. They are infuriated and appalled that a rich white man like Donald Trump has to answer to N-word female judges and prosecutors. And they intend to block truth-telling black people from any meaningful participation in any democratic institution. Kamala Harris, Ketanji Brown Jackson, and Nicole Hannah Jones have all been victims of this same racist, sexist, coordinated effort that says black women are not qualified, no matter how qualified they may be. Today, as we remember and praise what a great servant has done, it also serves to make clear what God and our ancestors called us to do in this time. In our scripture, the Israelite religious leadership took Jesus before Pontius Pilate. They charged, he stirs up the people from Galilee even down to this place. That's the King James Version. The NIV reads, he stirs up the people. He started in Galilee and has come all the way here. The New Living Translation reads, he is causing riots wherever he goes, from Galilee to Jerusalem. The point that they are trying to make to Pilate is that this man is dangerous to the existing social order. Everywhere he goes, he incites and inspires people to stand up and resist oppression. They were charging Jesus with being a troublemaker, a dangerous revolutionary. And contradictory to traditional Christian doctrine, Jesus was not a blameless lamb. He was not an innocent victim wrongly accused. Jesus was guilty as charged because the liberation struggle of the African nation Israel was dangerous to Roman domination. Preaching the kingdom of God was dangerous to the rule of the Roman Empire. Accepting the authority of God was dangerous to the authority of Caesar. The Messiah had a duty to be dangerous to the evil and corrupt world that he came to change. Likewise, Martin Luther King and his legacy. Martin Luther King was killed and his legacy altered for one reason and one reason only. Martin Luther King was dangerous. J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI labeled him an enemy of the state. They charged that he was not an innocent, nonviolent protester or a blameless Christian preacher. He was not a non-threatening moral crusader or an unrealistic dreamer. He was a clear and present danger to the evil, racist American social order. He was guilty as charged. Martin Luther King was dangerous because black empowerment is dangerous to a racist enemy system. Attaining full humanity and full citizenship for black people is dangerous to white supremacy. Being a drum major for justice is dangerous to a world built on racial oppression. Being an antidote to fear was dangerous to white domination. Being a prophet for righteousness is dangerous to an unrighteous world. His example of courage, intellect, sincere devotion, and uncompromising dedication was dangerous to the myth of black inferiority. His commitment to God and God alone made him dangerous to an evil, racist world. He had a duty to be dangerous in a world that he was called to change. Now that we are in touch with the real Martin Luther King Jr., we can hear what he is telling us today. Not how we got over, not how everything is all right, not how we made it through. If you're in touch with the real, authentic Martin Luther King Jr., you can hear him telling us, we're still on the battlefield. The struggle is not over. The work is not done. There are many rivers yet to cross, many hills yet to climb, many miles yet to travel. We are on a multi-generational journey to regain our traditional greatness. Each generation is indispensable to the process, but we can only reach that destination by following Dr. King's example of commitment to God and God alone. Commitment to God makes you dangerous in an evil world. Seeking God's justice makes you dangerous to a world of injustice. Fighting for God's righteousness makes you dangerous to a world of unrighteousness. Standing on God's truth makes you dangerous in a world built on lies. And that means that it's our duty to be dangerous in an evil, racist world built on the oppression, exploitation, suppression, and marginalization of black people. In this world, it is our duty to be dangerous, to stir up the people from Galilee even down to this place until justice rolls down like a river and righteousness like a mighty stream. Amen and Ashe.